Let's now look into this conversation that keeps on resurfacing with recent data conducted by the insurance service provider, OLEA, suggesting that the highest ransom payout to date was 150 million rand to secure the release of a kidnapped person. South Africa has been ranked to the 6th place, becoming one of the world's kidnapping hotspots for ransoms, which is now also moving to low-income areas. So how complex is this matter? IRS Forensics Investigations CEO Chet Thomas is joining us for this conversation. Chet, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us. So I saw a report yesterday in the Business Times indicating that if we look at kidnappings over the past decades, that they have tripled. This is just over the past decade. What does this tell us about South Africa and also the complexities relating to kidnapping and how it's also taking new forms?
Morning to you and your viewers from chilly Johannesburg. Kidnap for ransom in South Africa has become a major problem for the authorities, a major problem for those families of people who are getting kidnapped, and it is growing exponentially. I think that the statistics that are released aren't quite correct in the fact that a lot of these so-called high-profile kidnap for ransom cases go unreported simply because the families are told not to get in contact with the authorities or their loved ones may be harmed or even killed. So these are figures that are coming out of reported kidnappings, and I also find it a little bit dangerous that they've quoted the figures of the amounts that have been paid out in ransom. We knew that there were ransoms paid out for businessmen from specific communities that were in the tens of millions of rands, including a family of young brothers from Polokwane. But to put out a figure of 150 million just creates a worse situation where syndicated crime now sees this as more of an opportunity, and you'll see far more copycat syndicates following suit because it seems like such a lucrative crime. Now, when we talk about kidnap for ransom, it's very different from the other kidnappings we've seen over the years. There's a number of different types of kidnapping, but kidnap for ransom is specific. Somebody's taken, and it's because there's a monetary value that's attached to that person, and a ransom demand is made. What we've seen, though, is that the copycats aren't just doing this in the more sophisticated way of kidnappings, where they're hiring soldiers, hiring cars, hiring firearms, hiring safe houses, and going out and looking for high-profile victims that they have intelligence on. But we're even seeing it in informal settlements, in middle-class communities, in the township environment, where people are being kidnapped, and the amounts vary. It could be a few hundred rand, it could be a few thousand rand, it could be a couple of hundreds of thousands of rand, and of course it goes all the way into the millions, depending on the value of the target.
Yeah. So what informs that? Because we used to the idea of a kidnap for ransom being that a wealthy person would be targeted, and then you get the millions of rands of payouts. But now if somebody kidnaps somebody for 10,000, for 5,000, how should we understand what's happening outside of just these thugs becoming copycats? But what informs that?
It's a lucrative way of making money. Kidnapping may not have crossed their minds. There may have been opportunistic criminals that were stalking people and then mugging them for their cell phones, or holding people to ransom in their house during home invasions, or holding them in their vehicles, and then taking their banking particulars from their phone and transferring funds, or taking their ATM cards and by force obtaining the PIN number. It's a natural progression. You have opportunistic criminals that are started from shoplifters and end up being murderers. The problem we have in South Africa is that there's a symbiotic relationship between all syndicated or organized crime. And that is whether you're in the cash in transit space, whether you're in the ATM bombing space, whether you're in the kidnapping space, whether you're in the murder for hire space, you all need the same tools of trade. You all need to find vehicles that have been stolen that can be used for the execution of the crime. You all need to find weapons, preferably automatic rifles. People that are trained in this, whether they're Isinkabi from the Cape, whether they're ex-military trained personnel, there's a pool of these people that have been made available. And what we saw coming out of KZN a couple of years ago is that Isinkabi that were used to settle taxi disputes were then getting rented out by taxi bosses as a new revenue stream to take out businessmen or to take out people in other disputes. So what's happened here with kidnapping is people have seen just how lucrative it is, and we have these high level, and we call them high level because they're sophisticated, they're organized syndicates that are involved in this. And then you've got these wannabes at the bottom of the rung who are wanting to work their way up, who are now copying them. And by copying them, it's created a new set of challenges, because when it comes to the more sophisticated kidnap forensics that are taking place, crime intelligence has played a very strong role in establishing an anti-corruption task team together with their partners within state law enforcement, as well as private sector security companies. But these guys are ready to go in and look for these high-profile cases. They have the necessary infrastructure, and now suddenly playing out at localized level are all these smaller kidnappings that are taking place, where the victim's safety is as valuable to the authorities as a high-value victim, but it may not necessarily be getting communicated through to these kidnapping task teams because it's happening at localized level. And perhaps it's taking too long to report children that are missing, women that are missing, men that are missing, and perhaps it's not been taken as seriously at station level as one would expect when it's a more high-profile kidnapping that goes to one of these integrated task teams that have been created.
Yeah. How difficult is it to investigate kidnappings, especially kidnappings for ransom? Because we also look at the law as a deterrent for criminal intent. But how difficult is it to prosecute kidnappings for ransom specifically? And also, if you look at, for instance, the story of the Motti brothers, I'm not too sure whether anyone had been arrested in that particular case. It was a high-profile case. I'm not too sure whether there's been any prosecution.
In respect to the Motti case, the family emigrated to Dubai, and several other people that have been victims of this heinous crime have emigrated and left South Africa. There's devastating effects to this crime that are not just seen by the family, but it's seen by their workers, their colleagues, their employees. A lot of them disinvest in South Africa and go elsewhere. When it comes to the prosecution of these crimes, if kidnappers are arrested, it's the same as any other crime. Provided the evidence is there, they can be prosecuted. And we're seeing that a very, very, very strong standpoint has been taken by our investigative, intelligence, and prosecutorial authorities in the way in which they approach these specific crimes. And because they organize crimes, and because they're acting as a organized syndicate, they would most probably be charged in terms of POCA, which is the Prevention of Organized Crime Act, which was promulgated in 1998 and has very, very strong sentencing and fining mechanisms within it. The problem is that these syndicates are very, very sophisticated. And just like we have counterintelligence within our police service to try counter it and to try apprehend the perpetrators, they started off these criminal gangs with intelligence. They didn't just willy-nilly choose somebody ad hoc. The majority of the time, kidnap for ransom is not opportunistic. It is very well planned and very well executed. And normally by the time the victim is released, these guys are in the wind. But without going into detail, because we don't want to give away investigative techniques, the task team that's been established and led primarily by crime intelligence within SAPS is working around the clock. They have been making inroads into identifying members of the syndicates, the top tier leadership, some of which are in South Africa, some who actually don't even live in South Africa. A lot of these crimes are linked to international syndicates, and we are going to see a lot more takedowns in the coming weeks and months. However, what must be said is the fact that it's now entrenched itself as a crime where the majority of the people have been getting away with it, it means that we are going to see a continued rise in this crime until it's stamped out. So much the same as what we're seeing with CRTs, much the same as what we're seeing with ATM bombings, much the same as what we're seeing with murder for hire, kidnappings are definitely going to continue rising.
Yep. And without a security risk assessment, how do I know whether I'm vulnerable or a potential target for kidnapping?
Sure, it's a tough one. We don't know if we're going to become targets because, like we mentioned earlier in the insert, they are now targeting across the societal sector. It's no longer confined to just the rich and famous, or people who are well-moneyed or who have family members who are moneyed. We're seeing this happening in informal settlements. We're seeing this happening in middle-class suburbia. We just have to become very risk averse. We need to be very aware. And South Africans are becoming far more risk averse and have been for a while because of hijackings, because they don't want to get caught up in a shootout between the authorities and cash in transit heist gang members. But what it means is that we as communities need to go back to being a little bit quizzy, being a little bit more inquisitive about the goings on of our family members, of our community members. We need to not shy away from technology. There are apps that can be uploaded to our various digital devices that can lead us as family members to know where others are. We need to be situationally aware of where our children are at all times, where our family members are. And it may sound like overkill, but it's very, very necessary that we go through this phase while they're looking for a short-term solution to these violent crime and contact crime issues that we have in South Africa. So one must always remember that there is no waiting period to report somebody missing. If there's anything suspicious, we need to report it. If somebody hasn't kept to their normal pattern, their normal routine, we need to report it. If we can't get hold of somebody, we need to report it. We need to go back to that family-orientated way of doing things where we are constantly curious about one another, constantly wanting to make sure everybody's okay. It doesn't mean that we are being overly cautious. It means that we are being cautious because this is a rising crime. And unlike other crimes in South Africa, this is exceptionally devastating because of what can happen during the kidnapping and, of course, the psychological damage that follows the kidnapping.
Chet, thank you so much for your time. Chet Thomas is the CEO of IRS Forensic Investigations on the rise in kidnappings in the country.